Hello, and welcome to Journey to SCA 2024. I am your host, Shelly-Ann Edwards Barron, and I'm a creative writing specialist who focuses on what is called multisensory learning. If you're new to the lives, let me just give a little bit about myself and what multisensory learning is all about, and then we'll get right into what we're talking about today. So I am really concerned about the way creative writing is generally taught because I think that of all the things we're talking creative writing, and students are not often given that opportunity or trained in the skills that would really help them be as creative as possible. And this is where multisensory learning comes in. Multisensory learning is all about engaging different senses through the instructional learning and production process. Now, I haven't explained it quite like that before, but I thought today is a good day to mention a little bit more about it. So you see, multisensory learning is not only about presenting students with opportunities where they can learn things and be introduced to material in multiple ways. They're actually supposed to be allowed to produce also in multiple ways. So this is where project-based learning really is highlighted because students are given the opportunity to create things and to make things and to present ideas in different ways besides just reading, writing, or speaking. So they might be allowed to demonstrate things, they might be allowed to conduct experiments, and all those types of things that engage the student with multiple senses. And when we're talking senses, we're talking about, sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing, as well as movement and emotions, because movement and emotions play a role in how students learn. So all of these things must be engaged. So what I am advocating is that many of these writing activities that we're talking about can be introduced and explored with students through many different avenues. So, for example, today we're talking about conflict in the narratives and we're talking about opinions in reports. And if you had an opportunity to listen to the last video, you would remember that I mentioned that when I teach the facts and opinions, students and I do an experiment and then we use that as a launching pad for, for really talking about opinions and facts. Because sometimes, students might know what it means on paper. If you ask them for a definition, they tell you what it is, or they might say, Miss, I can't put it into words, or Sir, I don't know, but I have an idea. Yet when we talk to them about it in terms of giving them opportunities to express themselves, chances are they might slip into giving opinions. Because as it is, for the most part, many of us, we say things and we mention them with authority as if they are fact, when in fact they are opinion. And we, even as adults, we kind of slip into opinions and speak them as facts from time to time. So with the little ones, we can't expect anything different. What we do need to show them is how to recognize when they're speaking facts and when they're speaking opinions, what is appropriate and what is not. And this is the whole point of report writing, to help students develop that critical thinking when it comes to what they read and what they share. So that's a little bit about the multisensory learning and how I do some of it in my classes. And from time to time I will be sharing with you how you can implement it with your students or with your children or child, so that learning about writing really and truly can be a lot more fun than it is right now for many students. Some enjoy it right as it is, but some, and I'm going to go on a limb and say the majority, really don't. Many students are kind of traumatized when it comes to learning about writing. So let's talk, as usual, I'm going to begin with the report writing, and we're talking facts and opinions. And of course, while there may be some facts to support what I just said, a lot of that is my opinion. And many people agree with me because it is also their experience. But for now, until we have the data to show, okay, we did a survey or we did research or something, then we really are still going to say it's pretty much still an opinion, a significant opinion that has a lot of evidence behind it, but still an opinion. And so let's go. I'm going to share my screen. I have a slide today. Um, share screen. Okay, so this is one of the slides that I use sometimes with my students. I haven't taught it quite like this in a while because, excuse me, we normally go through all of this in one session when we do the experiment. So what we're talking here, facts versus opinions. We mentioned that last week. We looked at a fact being details that can be verified using five senses, and opinions being feelings, beliefs, attitudes, and judgments. And here is where we really want to focus on what the children are writing, because sometimes they write attitudes, feelings, beliefs, and judgments without recognizing that that's what they're doing, because that's the way they speak. And we make judgments about everything when we're talking to people, and it comes across so naturally and effortlessly that this is the way actually that opinions kind of sneak into the report, because of judgments being made as things were going on. So this is something that we really do need to pay attention to. We also can consider that with a fact, remember these are observations that you can check. Opinions, these are things you decide and others will agree or disagree, but these are the writer's personal decisions. And let's give an example here. So we have this example. Orange is the name of a fruit and a color. Now, that's a fact, because if you go check, is orange the name of a fruit? You can look up fruits and see if there's one named an orange. You can check the names of colors and see if you find the name orange. And so you can check that and verify, yes, it is true. Now, if we say something like orange skies are beautiful, that changes, it's not a fact, that is actually now an opinion. Or if we say something like oranges are delicious, orange is the best color, any of those things would be the writer's opinion or the writer's judgment, the writer giving value to what they're saying. And anytime you end up with that position of giving value, meaning giving your judgment, adding your attitude, your belief, your concepts to something that's going on, that is when we really are getting into the opinion. All right, so the thing with opinions is that they're quite often introduced and expressed through adjectives and adverbs. And certainly at this level, students are, the primary school level, they are going to be expressing the majority of their opinions using adjectives and adverbs. Therefore, as mentioned, I think I had mentioned it in the last session, the idea is that you really want to avoid adjectives and adverbs as much as possible, because here is where the opinions can sneak in. All right, so let's see the ones that are acceptable. So the ones that can be used would be adjectives that describe how many and what type. And again, we have to be careful with, okay, how many and what type. We really do need to be specific. So if we're answering the question how many, a response like a few or some, those are general kind of responses that can be interpreted many different ways. I know some people would say, okay, when we say a few, we mean three, but not everybody interprets it that way. And when we say some, what's the quantity exactly? So there's no definitive, clear, objective response that we can check. somebody would have to agree with us that it's a few or some. Another person might disagree and say, well, that's a lot for the context. In some cases, two might be a few or two might be one too many. So it really is a matter of opinion when we're talking about those general responses to that question, how many? So we want to stick with numbers. Numbers are very precise and you can check and actually count them out and get to the to the response that is a fact that they verify. If you say things like all is a little bit ambiguous as well, in the sense that depending on how you use it. If you say all the students in the class, if you know how many students in the class, you know everybody attended, that is fine. If you're saying something like, all my answers, so we really do have to be careful how we use that word all and make sure it's used in a context that can be precise and objective, because all is one of those words that can be used when we're expressing hyperbole, for example. All and everything, we use those when we're exaggerating. So we do need to be careful how we use it if we're trying to express fact. Okay. Also, let's see. So, what type? And in this case, we would have to be precise. We would have to use labels that are clear and obvious, that everyone seeing it can verify. What type of book is a maths book? How do we know? Well, we pick it up, we see maths textbook written on it, mathematics concepts. We know it is a math textbook. So these are the ways that we can be precise with our adjectives. Other adjectives we would need to be, kind of careful for. Um, we really do need to look at, when we're talking about size, any kind of comparison, talking about color, quality, shape, and those indefinite quantities that I mentioned before, like many, few, most, some, all of those should really be avoided, because this is not precise, not exact, not clear, and that's what you really want to aim for with the use of adjectives. So be careful of these, don't use them at all. If you absolutely feel like you must use them, think twice about, is this information really relevant to the report? Is it helping the reader? So if you're talking about, let's say, the size of a bruise, if there was an injury or something like that, is it necessary to tell the reader the size of the bruise, or is it just enough to know that there was a bruise? If you want to talk about the color, let's say the bruise turned red, it might not be necessary to say that it turned red or any other color in that kind of general detail, because somebody else might look at it and say it's blue, somebody might say it's purple, somebody, bruises tend to not be like one set color. So you could just say that, after the person got injured, the bruise changed color, the skin changed color, and that would be enough for what the purpose of the report is. So really think about the relevance of the information. Yes, you want to go into details and make the report seem less boring, but the thing is, reports are kind of straightforward and what most people would consider boring, because you don't really need excitement in the report to get the details out. That's the realm of narratives when you want to get the excitement. So when it comes to adverbs, my recommendation with adverbs is none at all. I know we sometimes use adverbs for transitions. I recommend using transition phrases instead, so that you could really avoid that opinion sneaking in, because here's what can happen. when we say things like quickly and slowly, that is our opinion and our judgment about the way something is done. When we say usually and always, again, our opinion about the way something is done. Almost enough opinion. Obviously, certainly, even things like consequently, and subsequently. Subsequently is more of time bound, but in a report, and to really build and maintain that formal tone that we'll be talking about again and again and again, because that's really what makes reports formal, that full formal tone. And yes, the casual vocabulary should be avoided, but also there are certain ways in terms of developing the sentences that make them more, complex and compound and not just a simple presentation. Using, single word transitions also tend to reduce the formal tone. So I usually recommend, transition phrases, which are just, a few words. Um, Instead of saying subsequently, you can say, after the match ended, that kind of thing. So we're substituting to be a little bit more precise by using the transition phrases. But we will get to that. Remember, we're on a journey and discussing transitions is part of it. So these are to be avoided. All right. So we don't want any of these. We want to stay away from the adverbs, stay away from as many adjectives as possible, and we really want to just stick with things that can be observed, can be verified, and not the point where even if everybody agrees, it could still be our opinion. It's a unanimous opinion, and we can possibly act on it. But the whole point of a report, remember, is to present what happens so that the reader can form their own judgment. So we're really trying not to taint the report with our judgment as the writer. We want to make it in such a way that the reader has their own opportunity to come to their own conclusion. So when it comes to opinions, we're definitely staying away from the adjectives. That safe would be the quantity, and then with quantity we're using precise numbers and so on as responses, and then we can describe type again when we're being precise. All right. So one thing I didn't mention here is emotions, because at this point in the game of, in the experience of talking about opinions, we know that emotions are very, very subjective and should not be mentioned at any point. And so if we say, for example, the teacher was angry when she did something, that's our opinion that she was angry. We don't know for a fact that she was angry. If it is, we say the teacher scolded the children because they were angrily shouting at each other. Again, ly, adverb. We don't need to talk about emotions at all. There is, however, I think I mentioned this as well, but it's worth repeating because remember, we're in a loop when it comes to the practice and the discussion, and we're going around and around. We're going through that loop because the repetition and the reinforcement helps a lot and helps students to see and experience and really internalize what works and what they should not do. So with emotions, there is one workaround, and the only workaround that makes it possible to mention any kind of emotion in a report, and that is when it's used in reported speech. So let's say you are present and a teacher asks a student, "Why did you do that?" And the student replies, "I was angry." You can present that in reported speech to say, Miss Mrs. Sicharan asked Richard why he hit John, and Richard replied that he was angry, and he hit John because he was angry. So if we say something like that, then that is something that is not our opinion. We did not say Richard was angry. Richard said he was angry, and we can tell others that we heard Richard say he was angry. So that brings it out of opinion in out of our opinion into a fact, because even though Richard is expressing his own opinion, all we are saying is that Richard said this, and that works. That is acceptable for the report. So we're working with really being careful with our words, paying attention to what exactly those words are saying, and can we double check these things. If at any point we're concerned about it being an opinion, then leave it out. There's a lot more that could probably be said when reporting on whatever incident you're reporting on, or accident, and well, the other types of reports that we have. So the again, and I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but I think this week would really be spent on having students recognize what is opinion and what is not. So expressions, worksheets, activities, and you really want to start them off with identifying what is an opinion. So you might want to do a worksheet on that. Then, how they can maybe change a fact or an opinion into a fact, so that will give them practice, so that if they are going through their report and they recognize, oh my goodness, this is an opinion, how do I fix it? Do they erase the whole thing and write it over? So, some ideas on how you could, change things into reported speech so that they can work around their writing of opinions. That's one option. They can take it out altogether, say something different. So really being able to, feel as comfortable as possible with facts and recognizing when they are speaking opinions for themselves. So one thing that I like to tell students to do is to, go to like the newspapers. Lots of articles in the newspapers. Lots of them have opinions and very expressive, sensational language. And the student can identify those. So, well, okay, this is opinion, this is a fact, and so on. So it's a really mixed bag when it comes to newspaper articles. And that's perfect for having students interact with things like that. And then students can possibly even rewrite an article to make it more formal, to make sure they remove all the opinions. So these are all activities. They may not do it perfectly because there are still a few concepts to get to, like, for example, a reported speech. If they are familiar with reported speech, we'll definitely have them use that. If they're not, then they can just simply omit the opinion from the article, rephrase it in a way that states it as a fact, removing adjectives, removing adverbs, and so on. All right, so that is pretty much what is the basics of facts and opinions. And remember, this is something that you will have to continuously be doing. And so we're investigating it early because you are going to have to come back to it repeatedly. And it's one of the things that causes students to have trouble with expressing themselves effectively in reports. So we're doing it early so that we will have as many opportunities as possible to come back to it and reinforce this idea about facts and opinions. All right, so that's it for the report writing, and let's move on to the narratives. Now, with narratives, we're talking about conflict, and I had a slide here with conflict that I wanted to show you. It's not mine. Well, I'll show you one that's not mine first, and then I'll show you a breakdown that I think is useful, that I help students understand. play. Remember, narratives are a mix of narration and description. And this narration and description has to be around the efforts of a character who is trying to accomplish a goal. Now, if the character is trying to accomplish a goal, and in accomplishing the goal, there are many steps, and every step they just do the step and they get through, then the story is pretty much going to be going across like that. We're not going to get that rising action that we are thinking about, and that should be included in this in the story. So the idea of the rising action is that conflict is present and conflict increases before you get to the climax. And it is that increase in conflict that gets students to create the rising action necessary. Why do we call it rising action? It's really because, like the tension is rising in the story, and tension would rise when things keep going wrong and the main character is getting more and more frustrated as they try to accomplish their goal. So, a couple of things to remember. One, a main character must have a goal in order for there to be conflict. I've said that already and I'll keep saying it because this is something that students don't really grasp the first time around. It is something that needs to be repeated several times. All right? So, with the conflict, character has a goal, and then in attempting to accomplish that goal, things will happen. And the goal could be anything. The goal could be, they just want to have fun with their friends and have a relaxing evening. And then stuff starts happening that, throws that off. These are points of conflict. And there are different types of conflict. That's the one I wanted to show you. Let me just share my screen on that one. And this is a tab that I got from Live Worksheets. Live Worksheets is an excellent place to get lots and lots of different information. And this actually is an entire worksheet, right? So there's a first page where types of conflict, what is a conflict, a literary element involving struggle between two opposing forces. And the main character would be one of the forces, and whatever is trying to stop them or interfere with their achievement of the goal, that's the force. And then we have person versus person. This is the one that most people are familiar with because, there's a villain, there's somebody actively doing something against the main character. Person versus self. This is one that students aren't so familiar with and is definitely worth talking about. They would recognize it if you point it out in movies and programs and cartoons even, because the idea is that the character is trying to work against something that is happening within them. So let's say in this case, Jacob must choose whether to tell his mom about his bad choice. So you did something wrong. Do you confess or do you not? Do you lie? These are battles that happen within you that you have to choose. And so it's definitely worth considering because these person versus self is really in all the movies and so on, where you have the concept of a character growing and a character developing, which is different from a character being described, which we will talk about later on as well. The idea is that the character has to go through something and process something inside himself or herself, and then based on that, they learn a lesson and become a better person. So that really works with the person versus self. So maybe the character is afraid and they have to go through some things and develop, more courage and so on. So there's a lot that can be said about the person versus self, and excellent writers are able to work in this conflict along with the other types of conflict that can happen in a story. So we have the person, let's say the character is being bullied and they have a villain that they have to face, but then they are afraid. And in order to fight off the bully, they have to gain courage and trust themselves more, rely on their friends. So that's a lot of internal things. So the person versus self is something that's really kind of like the undercurrent and it's underlying all the other types of conflict. But students just need to know what it is and what it's about. And we're starting the discussion on conflict this week. First thing to do, of course, is to show them the different types of conflict, which is what we're going through here. And like I said, like worksheets, you can do a search. What I recommend when you're doing searches for information online related to conflict and so on, add the words K-12, that's kindergarten to grade 12, that's in the American system. But when you do that, you would get more child friendly responses. Because, of course, as I said, and I'm hoping that you would remember, what we're teaching students to do in terms of writing this SEA style narrative is something that all writers do. So, whether you're writing a novel, a short story, a medium length story, whatever it is, whether you're publishing or it's for church or whatever the story is for, you will be going through this kind of process. You will be discussing conflict and setting and character development. These are all things that are typical to stories across the board. So when you just search conflict, you may get quite a lot of information that would be more suitable for an older group. Even if it's teenagers, you still might get a lot of information that is described, is correct, and is accurate, and you probably use it. You'd have to break down possibly and filter it for the age group that you're working with. The recommendation then is to just, if you're putting in types of conflict, or for work with that, just put K-12 or children, you can add that in. But I've found that when I use the word children, what happens is that it gives me situations involving children, not that I could teach to children. But when you put K-12, K-12 is the system in the United States, so they understand what you're looking for. The algorithm understands that what you're looking for is something that you can use to teach. So that's Google search tip of the day. When you're looking for information for children that you want to use to teach, just add the words or the letters K-12. And you just put the letter K and the number 12, and that's it. And you'd be getting a lot more relevant material. But okay, let's go back to the diagram, to the chart. So we have person versus nature, and of course, nature would be anything to do with the weather, anything to do with animals, plants, anything at all involving the aspects of nature. So in this example, Mark and Kyle are in the woods playing when they realize a tornado is coming. So that's weather. You can have, if they were playing in the woods, maybe they hear some noises and realize that there's a bear in the woods. That's also nature. If you're dealing with something maybe supernatural, maybe there's a vine that's coming after them and it's alive and, all these kinds of things, that is still, it's supernatural. It is maybe science fiction, but it's also still related to nature because we're talking about plants. So anything to do with animals, plants, and the weather, that falls under nature as well. Then we have person versus society, students protesting, police brutality. We can also talk about maybe the principal decided to reduce attendance and students are protesting. Maybe there's a decision in the cafeteria not to serve certain things that they like. So all of these things come under society. because society is against tradition, law, rules, regulations, anything created by a group that would be governing, that would fall under society. Um, the main character resists, we're going to person versus supernatural. We have main character resists forces that are not of this world. Not of this world meaning paranormal, supernatural, ghosts, creatures from the dark, and those kinds of things. Those are considered supernatural. Um, this sounds kind of creepy though. Cassie is haunted by a ghost of her former best friend. Yeah, once we hear haunted, we're thinking not a pleasant experience. And I do tend to shy away from getting into these kinds of stories with my students. So we don't really look at supernatural so much. But if a student is comfortable writing it and they're familiar with the style and all those things and they want to write it, I wouldn't necessarily tell them outright no. I would still guide them, but I would remind them that this is an exam. Yes, you're learning to write stories in general, but this is an exam. And as an exam, you have to be mindful of the reader who is reading the exam. Yes, they want to try to be objective, but the whole point is that you want to make sure that you deliver on the skills that are required. So it's not necessarily about making the story, exciting and wonderful only. You have to do that within the context of showing how you develop character, showing how you describe setting, and all these other things. So just keep that in mind. Finally, we have the main character resists technological forces. That's character person versus technology. So John's computer keeps crashing. You can go into the full realm of science fiction where you could get, robots and, aliens and all these other types of, that comes under like that supernatural under technology because when we encounter other races, alien civilizations, and so on, is either our technology is more advanced than theirs, which is how we encountered them, or their technology is more advanced than ours, and then how things play off between the two with that encounter. So not only is it technological forces, but we do say like science and technology. So technology, we also want to include science so we can have the whole mad scientist thing and all of that and really deal with the idea of conflict within certain contexts. Now, like I was saying earlier, it's not just about having one conflict. You can have several different conflicts because the whole point of rising action is to have at least 3 points in the story. And I recommend only three. You may add a fourth one if the student writes quickly and writes well, but most students can handle three in developing their rising action. And your conflict doesn't have to be only one type. So it doesn't have to be like 3 steps of person versus society or 3 steps of person versus technology. So you can have, the complication, which is the first part of the problem. That could be the, technology, then you can have society, then you can have nature. You can mix it up as long as everything is connected and the story flows effectively. And as you're practicing, students will learn how to do that, especially if you're working with a particular plot development structure that really helps them see and give that step by step. So these are the different types of conflict. And this particular worksheet, you can actually just you can download it, add it to Google Classroom. This is live worksheets, and this is an interactive worksheet that you can actually You can see, there are spaces for students to write in answers. These are types of conflict, different examples. Um, we have ways to identify who is in conflict with each other. So this is to get started with. And what I did myself, I think this was like the number one or number two option that came up. So it's definitely something worth looking at. And when it comes to doing searches, as I said, type in that K-12 behind whatever it is you're looking for, and you would get more direct, relevant information. Now, the one I wanted to show you that I want to really highlight is something in particular, and I mentioned the whole idea of the rising action being dependent on how conflict is developed. So this particular representation is meant to show the development, because conflict is absolutely critical to the SEA style story, again, because of that rising action. And one of the reasons it really helps and develops a story is that the conflict creates a problem for the character, and then the character has to respond to that. And it is in the response of the character that readers are really enthralled and they get the information. So it doesn't matter how exciting the conflict itself is, if the character doesn't respond, then all the excitement dies down. So the whole point of building that rising action is how you work out that character response. And in working out that character response, you'd notice a couple things about what you're seeing on the screen here. We have a small tree, we have light weights, smaller activity in order to react to it. When we increase that conflict, the conflict is bigger, we need more effort to react to it and to attempt to solve it. And then when we get to the biggest problem of the story, which is the second increase in conflict, then we have the most amount of effort required to resolve it. And that resolution or solution for that conflict is what happens in the climax. So recognizing that as conflict increases, the main character's response to the conflict in terms of the effort they have to describe also increases. And this is how you get that rising action. So even if we start small, so we're starting with a small and then we're getting more and more, and then that makes it more intense. How the character responds is more intense, and so on. So that is the whole idea with the conflict and why it's important, what it is in terms of the different types of conflict that students can work with at this level, and how they can represent reactions to the conflict so that you get that effective rising action. All right, so I think that would cover what's necessary. And this week, what you're doing is making sure students understand that there are different types of conflict, and the fact that conflict must show up in the story. So we're not yet getting into, making the connections between the conflict and moving the conflict forward and all those things. We're just introducing conflict, even if they've heard about it before and they say they've done it before. Repetition, reinforcement, start with the foundation. Make sure students are able to recognize the different types of conflict, what it looks like. Maybe even you can do, give them a prompt and have them brainstorm about the different types of conflict and what it would look like for that prompt. So let's say you have a prompt where you are accused of doing something that you didn't do and you have to prove your innocence. How would the different types of conflict show up in that? So that prompt kind of leads toward a particular kind of conflict. But remember, this is creative writing, and with stories in particular, you can really introduce anything that works and really gets a story going. But you have to be able to introduce it in a particular way. So, getting students to recognize that, okay, this particular prompt, what does it lean toward? What does it suggest? What does it imply in terms of conflict? So you go through the 6 different types of conflict and they choose one. So, well, miss, I think, or sir, I think this one works because this it says this, and have them rationalize it and reason through it. So you might want to do a few prompts like that and have them select which type of conflict works best with that prompt based on the way the prompt is expressed. But then you want to take it a step further and ask them, how would any of the other types of conflicts develop and work for this particular type of story? So in that case, let's say you were accused of doing something that you didn't do. How are you going to prove your innocence? Then you can have somebody actively, like a what is it called? The person versus person. So you have a villain. Maybe you have a bully trying to, sabotage you for some reason. You can have, person versus nature. Let's say there's a storm coming and it has to be resolved before the storm comes. You can deal with, let's say, technology. Maybe you use some form of technology to help prove your innocence and that malfunctions. So that could be a conflict. So really present students with the prompt, give them the 6 different types of conflict, and have them brainstorm individually or as a group what could work in each of these types. Do that a few times, and that would really get them stretched and thinking beyond what they already know to think about how they can apply different forms of conflict to a story and still have it make sense and be relevant to a story. That is a skill that is not just going to come automatically. That is something that you'd have to teach students. Even those that you work with, students, are able to come up with these things quickly. It's not because they just happen to know it. It's quite possibly that they've been reading, they've had previous discussions about these things, they're very observant. Different students do things differently. And for those who are struggling with coming up with conflict and developing their ideas, starting them with these are the types of conflict, having them identify each type, make sure they understand what each type is all about, then using their understanding of each type to create specific relevant conflict for different prompts. That is the thing that you really want to be working on this week, to give them the foundation that when they begin writing, you're not going to have to keep reminding them, hey, where's your conflict? Where's the problem? Nothing is happening in this story. We need the rising action. They would already have that because they understand the conflict and the importance of conflict. Okay, so we're looking at understanding conflict first, and then moving into, we will get into a lot more detail about rising action and what that is and how to exactly do it. So I mentioned it today because it's important in terms of the general understanding of conflict and why conflict is important. But there are skills that students can express and learn about to help them achieve that rising action. But like I said, for now, present them with the 6 types, get them understanding how to identify them and what they can look like in stories, and then we can work on developing them. We're going to get into that next week. So thank you very much for those of you who are able to take in the live this morning. And for those of you who are looking at the replay, thank you so much for looking at the replay and taking your time out. If you have any questions about conflict and conflict development in stories, then please feel free, message me, let me know. And like I showed you last week, I got the draft of the flashcards. So they went back to the printers and we're getting those flashcards and posters. I didn't get a the sample of the poster to double check it, but the poster was fine, so that was okay. But those would be coming out in a couple of weeks, and I'd be sharing all about the cost and how to get your hands on that, because that 12-point plot development for narratives really gets students into the understanding of what I just showed you in terms of how to start, where to go, and what to go next. Students absolutely must understand those. And the good news is that I'm going to be talking about it from time to time throughout this series. And if you have access to the flashcards and the poster and the worksheets that you would get online once you take the package, then you'd be able to do the reinforcement and follow up with your child or your students. That would really reinforce and get them to completely internalize what's happening. And same thing with the reports. The full report package is finally complete, and I would be releasing those as soon as the prints are done. We had some changes to make to one of the booklets, which is why we get a proof copy. And because of the way some things weren't aligned effectively. They looked good on screen, digital, but when they were printed, that's when we really saw the differences. So we made those changes, and like I said, month end, I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am, because that report writing package in particular, it has the textbook, which gives you the basic concepts and some strategies and examples with experiments to introduce those. Then there's a workbook with practice activities for each of the lessons. And then there's a journal that students can, look at articles and refine their concepts and their ideas and express their thoughts with the report writing. So it's a complete package that gives you that opportunity to really engage in report writing. Even if you're not too sure about how to go about it, that package will set you straight. And it's by itself, just dealing with reports. So, and there's a lot of information. Like I said, 3 books, and each book is in excess of 90 something pages. So quite a lot that you can work with. So I'm really excited for the day, which would be very soon. Like I said, by the end of this month, when I can show you this is the package, here is how you get it. And when you get it, to get your feedback on how you were able to use it. Okay, so thank you again for sticking around, for following the lives. Please feel free, let me know what me too, I'm looking forward to it. And let me know what what would you like to hear more of, because it's important to me that what I'm sharing is as useful as possible to you. And while I can only do so much in terms of this 1 hour that I share with you every Tuesday, being able to create the resources that you need, whether it's for a classroom or for you as a parent, I really want to know what do you need, because I don't want to just, create another resource about reports and narratives because I think it makes sense. I want to create resources that are actually required, needed, and useful. And these are the resources that I'm sharing with you. These are the resources that I use in my own classes. So I know they work and I know they're effective, but I may be using things that are useful for me, but you might need something different. So please feel free, let me know. And I'll do my best to create as many useful resources as possible. All right, so thank you so much again. I said thank you a few times, so it's time to say goodbye this time. Okay, take care, and I'll see you next week. Journey to SEA 2024.